Hi YouTube, this is Joe Calton with Calton Cutlery. Visit me on the web, caltoncutlery.com. Today we are going to continue on our series, Knife Edge Retention Tips, and I think this one's going to be number 14, and it's going to be about hardness, okay? The last video, number 13, was about, it was really kind of going over lathe tools and how they kind of sort of play along with knife edges. The two main tooling types there being high-speed tool steel and carbide, mild steel tool bits with carbide inserts on them. And you know my thoughts on both of those. And that leads into knife edge hardnesses, or knife blade hardnesses. Okay, so it seemed to me like the current trend is everybody's after more and more edge retention, right? Well, about the easiest way to get more and more edge retention is to run your knife harder and harder and harder. Which sounds great until you go back to like the carbide lathe bit comparison. You know, high-speed tool steel generally deforms, carbide typically blows out. Okay, so now instead of just sharpening and maintaining, now you're having to completely reshape and then sharpen and maintain. Same thing happens with a knife edge. If you run your steel too hard and then you put any kind of sideways torque on it, you know, that's over and above what the geometry can handle, okay, you're going to have blowouts, and those are typically called chips. Now, the chip can be a little bit or it can be a lot. It kind of depends on your edge geometry. So hardness, geometry, edge retention, and toughness is kind of all balanced together, okay? So if you take a knife and start leaning towards too much of the extreme on one of those things, then the kind of the overall package will start suffering, okay? So let me, as an example, let's go the Victorinox Tinker, okay? This one has been in my pocket 15, 20 years, something like that, right? I got it as a safety award from a place that I quit working at, oh, it's like 15 years ago, something like that. So it's been in my pocket a long time. I have never broke it. I have, in fact, worn the blade down considerably. This blade is probably an 1/8 of an inch narrower now than what it was new. And I honestly don't use this often as the blade. I mean, I use the screwdrivers, you know, and the tweezers and all that kind of stuff an awful lot. But the blades, I probably only use them once a week or so. Now, this has got Victorinox's stainless steel, and it's pretty soft. Okay, the edge retention on this is not what I would consider to be great. In fact, it's a little on the low side, all right? Now, does that make this knife, you know, any less of a good tool than if it was run harder? Absolutely not. This is a multi-tool. Multi-tools are generally pressed, you carry them because they're handy, because they got all them tools packaged into one. Now, is a regular flathead screwdriver way better than the flathead screwdriver that's on this? It would be if you were carrying a regular flathead screwdriver in your pocket all day, every day. Not likely to happen, so you have this. This will not take the torque that a regular flathead screwdriver will, but that does not make it anything, you know, it doesn't make it less of a package. Now, if you were to take, now these things sell for 30 bucks or so shipped on Amazon, right? If you were to take that blade and replace it with you know, a good high carbon steel blade that was run up, you know, really hard, now all of a sudden, especially the folks that typically buy these and press them into the service that they're not really designed for, you're probably going to have an awful lot more breakages because the steel is harder. It won't flex as much before it breaks. These tend to get abused quite a bit. Now, hardness dictates your geometry, okay? If you have a very hard steel, okay, and it's too hard and it's a little bit brittle, okay, what you're going to have to do to give that blade toughness again is to change the geometry and make it thicker, all right? That's really about the only way to gain toughness. If it's too hard, it means it's going to want to chip out and it's going to want to snap. The only way to overcome that is to, make the blade thicker and more substantial, make it harder to bend and harder to break. If you make the blade softer, okay, it kind of the same deal. Now, if it's really soft, to resist bending, the only way to make it stronger is to make it thicker, okay? Now, if you run right along in that middle line, okay, to where now instead of being too soft and too hard, now it's kind of somewhere in the middle, now you can thin the blade out quite a bit because now the blade will flex before it breaks, all right? If you press it into too hard of a service, the edge is much more likely to deform in a narrower range, all right? So if the knife edge is too hard and you put too much sideways pressure on it, it'll blow out, okay? It'll blow chunks out. I should have looked in here somewhere. I've probably got one where you've seen them before, a big old frickin' semicircle out of the edge, okay? You could have a chip that's, just huge chunk of steel completely missing. If the knife edge is too soft, it's going to bend over considerably, right? Now, if the edge is just bent over, you can bend that back, all right, and still have a usable edge. Now, if you come closer to that middle range of hardness, okay, where it's not way too hard and it's not way too soft, if you got to put numbers on it, say, this old hickory high carbon steel blade, right? It's probably 1095 or 1085, somewhere around there. If it's at 66 Rockwell and you push it too far, it's going to blow out a big old chunk, right? If you run it at 50 Rockwell, okay, it's going to bend over a big old chunk. I mean, we're talking like pinky nail size big. I mean, huge, depends on what you're doing with it. Now, if you run that between, say, instead of, say, 50 and 66, if you run it between 55 and 62, depending upon grain size and all that kind of stuff, now you put that same knife in that same, situation where you put a little bit of sideways torque on it, too much, than what the geometry dictates. Now your chips will be, generally speaking, they'll be limited to the edge angle, okay? So like if you look at this blade here, you'll have, this right here is full thickness, okay? So this is your blade, your stock thickness. This right here, from here to here, is going to be your blade grind. And then from the very shoulder of the edge to the apex of the edge itself, that's going to be your edge angle, or your edge grind, right? If you run that high carbon steel between 54 and say 62 or so, now all of a sudden that edge damage is generally going to be limited to the edge grind right there. Okay, so much less steel to have to repair. Now, if you really pay attention to your steel supplier, you really pay attention to your grain size, your thermal cycling, all that kind of stuff. Now, if you run it on the higher end of that hardness, then you choose your geometry based upon that hardness. Now, generally speaking, you get really good edge retention and you get a reasonable amount of toughness. Now, how much of this do you as the end knife user have control over? Not very much, okay? Factories, they're going to run, pretty much all factories are going to run their steel on the softer end, okay, because you got folks out there that, for some reason think that you need to use a knife as a screwdriver, as a can opener, that you've got YouTubers that are saying, hey, you know what, I need to be able to pound that frickin' blade into a 2x4 and then bend it off sideways, and that tip should survive it, because by golly, it should, okay? You're always going to have dudes that do that kind of stuff. You're always going to have dudes that take, a Victorinox Tinker or something like that, and then open that up and go, yep, that's a 3.5-inch blade. That means I should be able to split a 3-inch log. If there's that much tip sticking out on the other end of that log, battening it, I ought to be able to whack on that thing with a rock, beat it through that stick that's got knots and everything, and that knife ought to survive and still be able to shave. You're always going to have dudes that do that kind of stuff. Okay, the factories know this. They're tired of paying warranty claims on perfectly good knives that folks just beat the crap out of, and so they're going to run their knives softer so that they have better chances of surviving that sort of stuff. Custom knife makers. Now I'm talking real makers, okay? I'm talking the guys that make knives according to the way that they use knives, and they've tested them over and over and over again. I mean, real knife guys that really care about the performance of their blades. We're not talking guys that just order up blanks and order up handles, slap the things together and sell them at flea markets, all right? Those guys, me included, pretty particular about the hardness and the heat treat regimen on each particular steel that I use, just because I've spent so much time developing those heat treats. If somebody calls me up and says, hey Joe, I know you normally like running your 1095 at 62, 63 Rockwell, but I want one at 66. Sorry, I'm just not interested in something like that. Or if they say, hey, I want you to, make me this blade out of 1095, but I want you to run it 54 Rockwell. I'm saying no, if you need more toughness, we'll change steels, but I'm not changing my heat treat just because I've spent a long time dialing them in, getting them to where they need to be, and then changing the geometry to reflect that heat treat to give you the optimum performance. So, but these are some thoughts on how to get you to kind of understand heat treats and hardnesses in different types of classes of knives, and so you can make a little bit more informed decision when you go to purchase a knife, and that way you'll have better edge retention with it, with the style of use that you do. So this one right now we're at like 12 minutes or so, and it's a little bit over the 10-minute mark that I'm trying to keep on these blades. But edge hardness as it relates to knives is kind of a big topic, and we could probably go on for several hours on this one, but we're gonna cut it off here and leave it short. So again, this is Joe Calton with Calton Cutlery. You can visit me on the web, caltoncutlery.com. Hope you enjoyed the video, and we will see you next time.